The skies were clear as the plane ascended, leaving behind the bustling streets of New York City. Captain Michael Green, a seasoned pilot in his mid-40s, sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls. Years of experience had shaped him into one of the airline's most trusted pilots. His reputation was spotless, calm, calculated, and always professional. But as the plane climbed higher into the clouds, there was something different about this particular flight. Among the passengers was Sarah Williams, a 23-year-old student traveling to attend a business internship. She had always dreamed of flying, and now she was on her way to a new chapter in her life. A chance meeting on a previous flight had connected Sarah to Michael. She remembered their brief conversation, his reassuring smile, and the way he spoke of the skies with such passion. She found herself intrigued by him, drawn not only to his expertise but also to the quiet confidence he exuded. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. For Michael, the flight was just another routine day. He had flown countless routes, spent hours in the air, and dealt with every situation imaginable. But there was something about Sarah's presence that caught his attention. As he glanced through the cabin during the pre-flight checks, their eyes met for a brief moment. It was a fleeting connection, but it lingered in Michael's mind. There was something about the way Sarah held herself, her youthful energy and the curiosity in her eyes, that sparked a strange feeling in him. The flight itself was uneventful. Michael and his co-pilot, Grace, expertly guided the plane through the sky, their communication fluid and effortless. Grace, Michael's wife, was a constant presence by his side. They had been flying together for years, their partnership built on mutual respect and a shared love for aviation. But lately, their connection had felt strained. The routine of their marriage had begun to weigh on him. There was a sense of distance between them, something Michael couldn't quite explain. His thoughts often drifted to Sarah, a young woman he barely knew but who seemed to offer him a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. As the flight progressed, Michael found himself thinking more about Sarah than he should have. There was no overt reason for it. She was just another passenger on a long flight. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, or the way she seemed so eager to hear his stories about flying. But as a professional, he knew he needed to keep his emotions in check. He reminded himself that his commitment was to the passengers and the safety of the flight, not to idle distractions. However, as the plane reached cruising altitude, Sarah found herself getting more curious. She'd heard about Michael's reputation from other passengers and was fascinated by his experiences. She had always dreamed of a life filled with adventure and excitement, and Michael seemed to embody those qualities. With her heart racing, she decided to take a chance. Sarah made her way to the cockpit door, where she politely knocked. Michael glanced up, surprised to see her standing there. Their brief conversation that day was innocent enough. Sarah asked him about his career, and Michael, ever the professional, shared a few stories about his time in the skies. But there was an undeniable connection. She was drawn to his confidence, and he found her youthful enthusiasm refreshing. In that moment, Michael realized that despite the years of flying, despite the hundreds of faces he had seen on his flights, Sarah stood out. She had a certain energy about her, something that had been missing in his life for quite some time. By the time the flight landed, both Michael and Sarah had exchanged a few words, and though the connection seemed brief, it was enough to leave an impression on both of them. Little did they know, this moment, small and seemingly insignificant, would be the spark that set off a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. After the flight, Michael couldn't get Sarah out of his mind. Their brief conversation had left an unexpected impression on him, one that lingered long after the plane had landed. He had always been disciplined about keeping his personal life separate from his work, but something about Sarah's curiosity, her youthful energy, and the way she listened to him made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. It was as if she had reawakened a part of him that had long been dormant, buried beneath the weight of routine and responsibility. It wasn't long before Sarah found a way to reach out. A few days later, she sent him an email, thanking him for the conversation and expressing her appreciation for his guidance. Michael, already intrigued by her, replied with a polite message, grateful for her kind words. It started as a simple exchange about the flight, but soon their emails evolved into longer, more personal conversations. Sarah began sharing details about her life, her ambitions, and her struggles as a student. She confided in Michael about her dreams of building a successful career and the pressure she faced from her family to excel. Michael, in turn, opened up about his own life. He spoke about his years of flying, the satisfaction he felt in his work, and the challenges he faced in his marriage. He didn't mention the cracks that had started to form in his relationship with Grace. He didn't want to burden Sarah with the details of his personal struggles. But the truth was, his marriage had become a routine, one that lacked the excitement and passion it once had. Grace, though a dedicated co-pilot, had become more of a companion than a lover. They went through the motions, but the spark between them had long since faded. As the emails continued, the boundaries between professional mentorship and personal connection blurred. Sarah's messages became more flirtatious, more personal. She began sharing small details about her day, asking for Michael's advice on matters beyond her studies. She would often compliment him, praising his experience and wisdom, which made Michael feel appreciated in ways he hadn't in a long time. He started to look forward to her messages, reading them with a sense of anticipation. Each reply felt like a small escape from the mundanity of his daily life. One evening, after another, long day of flying and a quiet dinner with Grace, Michael sat alone at his desk, scrolling through Sarah's most recent email. The words were simple, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Sarah had written, "I can't wait to hear more about your adventures. Maybe one day we could meet again? I'd love to learn from you in person." Michael's heart raced as he read the message. He had been on countless flights, met hundreds of people, but no one had ever affected him this way. He thought about Grace, about the life they had built together, and the family they had created. But then he thought of Sarah, her youthful excitement, her intelligence, her desire to learn from him. There was something intoxicating about it all, something that made him feel younger, more vital. The next day, Michael found himself responding to Sarah's message with an invitation to meet for coffee. He reasoned that it was harmless, a simple, professional meeting to discuss her future goals. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He wanted to see her again, to experience that spark of connection once more. When they met in person, it was as if the world outside ceased to exist. Michael had always been in control, always the one who held the power in his relationships. But with Sarah, he felt as though he were losing control. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and with every word she spoke, Michael found himself more and more drawn to her. Sarah, too, felt the magnetic pull between them. It was as if they were two pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to fit together. What started as a casual meeting became the beginning of something much more dangerous. They met again and again, each time growing closer, each time sharing more of themselves. The lines between mentor and student began to blur, and both Michael and Sarah knew they were treading dangerous ground. But neither of them could resist the pull of the connection that had ignited between them. What had started as a simple exchange on a flight had turned into something far more complex, far more destructive. They were both trapped in a web of desire and secrecy, unaware of the consequences that would follow. As Michael and Sarah's secret relationship deepened, the stakes grew higher with every passing day. What had begun as an innocent flirtation had escalated into an affair that neither of them seemed capable of controlling. They continued to meet in secret, always careful to cover their tracks. Every encounter felt like an illicit thrill, a forbidden escape from the realities of their lives. Michael, though aware of the consequences, found himself drawn to Sarah's energy, her passion, and her unrelenting desire to be close to him. She made him feel alive in a way he hadn't experienced in years. But as much as he tried to keep his emotions in check, he couldn't ignore the growing sense of chaos inside him. At home, things were beginning to unravel. Grace had always been supportive, and the two had shared a strong partnership, both in their personal and professional lives. They had been co-pilots together for years, and though their relationship had never been perfect, it had always been grounded in mutual respect. But lately, Grace had begun to notice Michael's increasing distance. He was more distracted, less engaged in their conversations. She had always trusted him implicitly, but there was a change she couldn't ignore. His late nights at the office, his growing detachment, something was wrong. Yet, she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Meanwhile, Sarah's feelings for Michael deepened. She wasn't content with their secret encounters anymore. She wanted more. She wanted Michael to choose her, to leave his wife and make her the center of his world. Sarah began to apply more pressure, subtly at first. She would talk about their future together, hinting at a life that could be hers if only Michael were willing to take the plunge. She began dropping hints about her feelings of abandonment, making it clear that she didn't want to be just another brief affair in his life. She needed him to choose her. Michael, on the other hand, was torn. He had always been a man of responsibility, someone who prided himself on his ability to balance his personal and professional life. But the affair with Sarah had thrown everything off balance. He could feel himself slipping, losing control over a situation that had once seemed so innocent. He couldn't deny the powerful attraction he felt towards Sarah, but at the same time, he knew the cost of continuing this relationship. The guilt weighed heavily on him, especially when he was with Grace. He couldn't imagine breaking her heart, yet he also couldn't imagine walking away from the connection he had with Sarah. The pressure from both women grew more intense. Sarah began to demand that Michael make a decision, leave Grace and be with her, or end everything between them. Michael promised that he would make a choice soon, but as the days passed, he found himself avoiding the issue altogether. He tried to tell himself that the affair was just a fleeting thing, that it was only temporary, and that it would fade away. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Grace, sensing the change in her husband, began to grow suspicious. She asked him questions about his behavior, about the late nights and the distant looks. But Michael, ever the master of evasion, deflected her concerns with excuses. Work had been busy, he was just tired, nothing was wrong. The more he lied, the more it ate at him. Yet he couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. To admit what he was doing would be to shatter everything he had worked so hard to build. Sarah, growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress, began to push harder. She was no longer content with the secrecy, with the stolen moments. She wanted to be the one Michael turned to, the one he couldn't live without. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to make it known. But her desperation was beginning to show. She started making demands, suggesting that Michael leave Grace, that he take the risk and build a new life with her. It was clear that Sarah wasn't just interested in a relationship. She wanted Michael to make a choice that would change everything. The more Sarah pushed, the more Michael felt cornered. He knew he needed to end things with her, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The affair had become an obsession for both of them, and neither was willing to let go. Michael was trapped between two women, one who represented his past, and one who symbolized an uncertain but undeniably thrilling future. He couldn't see the way out, and with each passing day the danger of his situation became more apparent. The affair was no longer just a matter of love or desire. It was a ticking time bomb, and Michael had no idea how long it would take before it exploded. The tension in Michael's life reached a breaking point as the affair with Sarah continued. To consume him, every day felt like a balancing act, and every interaction with Grace carried the weight of his secret. He tried his best to maintain appearances, to act as though everything was normal, but the cracks in his facade were becoming impossible to hide. His mind was always preoccupied. His conversations with Grace felt forced, and he was constantly looking over his shoulder, afraid that someone would find out the truth. Sarah, on the other hand, was growing more impatient. She could feel that Michael was slipping away from her, despite his promises. Every time they spoke, she heard the hesitation in his voice, and it infuriated her. She wasn't used to being second in anyone's life, especially not when it came to something she wanted so badly. Her desire for him had turned into a need, and the more she couldn't have him, the more determined she became to make him hers. She began to ramp up the pressure, sending him texts, emails, and even leaving. Messages on his voicemail, each one more urgent than the last. She would remind him of their connection, of the times they had spent together, and how they could be something more. It was no longer about passion. It was about control, about ensuring that Michael would make the choice she wanted him to make. Sarah began making ultimatums, subtly but forcefully, until it became clear to Michael that there would be no more playing it safe. He could feel the walls closing in on him, and he knew that the longer he kept this double life, the worse it would get. Yet every time he thought about ending things with Sarah, a wave of guilt and fear washed over him. He knew how much he had hurt Grace, but there was a part of him that didn't want to lose the excitement, the passion that Sarah brought into his life. He had been numb for so long, drifting through the motions with Grace, that Sarah's fiery presence felt like a lifeline. But he also knew that this could not last forever. His conscience screamed at him to end it before things went too far. But the more Sarah demanded, the harder it became to walk away. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk, Michael received an email from Sarah that would change everything. It was blunt, more direct than anything she had sent before. She told him that if he didn't make a decision soon, she would tell Grace everything. She was tired of waiting, tired of being the other woman. The email felt like a dagger to Michael's chest. He had known that Sarah was capable of making such threats, but reading the words in black and white made it all too real. The guilt hit him like a freight train. How had it come to this? How had he let things spiral so far out of control? He knew he needed to act, but what could he do? He couldn't imagine the heartbreak Grace would experience if she found out the truth. But at the same time, he couldn't bear the thought of losing Sarah. Later that evening, Michael met with Sarah at a quiet cafe. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the weight of their situation. Michael could barely look her in the eye as she laid out her demands once more. She told him she was done waiting. If he didn't choose her now, she would make sure Grace found out everything. The ultimatum was clear, and Michael could feel the pressure building with every word she spoke. But as Sarah's words sank in, something inside Michael shifted. The excitement that had once drawn him to her was now clouded by the realization of what was at stake. He wasn't the man he used to be. He wasn't someone who could balance this kind of lie any longer. The facade was crumbling, and the fear of losing everything he had built with Grace suddenly became more real than his desire for Sarah. That night, Michael went home with a decision in mind. He knew he could no longer keep living this double life. As he lay in bed beside Grace, the weight of his secret was suffocating. He could feel her warmth, hear her soft breaths, and yet all he could think about was the mess he had created. He had to tell her. He had to come clean, no matter the consequences. But as dawn broke the next day, Michael's world was about to spiral in an unexpected direction. Before he could face Grace with the truth, a call came in that would change everything. It was the airline. There had been an incident, and Michael's involvement in the case would soon become unavoidable. His world, already on the edge of collapse, was about to crumble entirely. The choice he had been avoiding for so long was now being forced upon him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The phone call that morning was like a thunderclap in the midst of Michael's already turbulent life. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, informing him that there had been a serious incident on a flight he had piloted several days earlier. The details were vague, but the airline's legal team needed to speak with him immediately. His stomach tightened, and his mind raced. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be dragged into something so monumental, something that would tie all his secrets together in an irreversible way. As soon as the call ended, Michael's thoughts began to spiral. The affair with Sarah, his lies to Grace, and now this. He felt as though everything was converging into a single, catastrophic moment. He had spent so much of his life maintaining control, keeping a professional distance from everything that mattered to him, but now it was all unraveling. He didn't have time to sit in silence for long. The airline's legal team needed answers, and he was forced to attend an emergency meeting at their headquarters. As he arrived, the gravity of the situation became clear. Several passengers had filed complaints about the behavior of the crew during the flight, including unusual interactions between the captain and a young female passenger, Sarah. There were rumors, whispers about an inappropriate relationship, but nothing concrete yet. However, the airline couldn't afford the public scrutiny, and Michael's name had come up. His heart sank as he sat in the sterile conference room, surrounded by legal experts and company executives. They asked him about the flight, about his interactions with Sarah, about the nature of their relationship. Michael's stomach churned. How could he explain it all? He couldn't deny the truth without implicating himself. But if he told them the whole story, it would cost him everything. His career, his marriage, his reputation, gone. He could already hear Grace's voice, her heart break, as she would inevitably find out the truth. But Sarah had been pushing him to choose, and now fate was forcing him to make a decision that felt impossible. In the meeting, Michael did his best to play it cool, denying any wrongdoing. He claimed there was nothing, inappropriate about his interactions with Sarah, that he had been simply offering advice to a young, aspiring student. It was the truth, but only part of it. He was careful with his words, trying to hide the extent of his emotional involvement with Sarah, but deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before his lies caught up with him. As the meeting dragged on, Michael received a message from Sarah. Her tone was colder than usual, more demanding. She told him that the situation was escalating and that he needed to make his decision. The email didn't mince words. Sarah was tired of waiting, and she wouldn't hesitate to expose their relationship if Michael didn't leave Grace for good. He could feel her pressure intensifying, the subtle threats in her words pushing him into a corner. When the meeting finally ended, Michael was left with a sinking feeling in his chest. The weight of his choices was unbearable. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. It was all falling apart, and no matter how much he tried to avoid it, the truth was going to come out. That evening, Michael came home to Grace. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a soft smile on her face, as she prepared dinner. For a moment, everything felt normal, like it had before. But as Michael watched her, he knew he couldn't delay the inevitable. The secrets, the lies, they were all too heavy to carry any longer. Grace could see something was wrong. She asked if everything was okay, and Michael felt the familiar ache in his chest, the guilt tightening around his throat. He wanted to tell her, but the words stuck. He could hear Sarah's voice in his mind, demanding that he choose. The tension in the room was suffocating, but Michael couldn't find the strength to speak. The next morning, Michael was given a final ultimatum from the airline. An internal investigation had been launched, and though there wasn't yet enough evidence to confirm any wrongdoing, the rumors surrounding his behavior were enough to warrant his suspension pending further review. Michael was informed that the investigation would likely take weeks, and in the meantime, he was advised to take a leave of absence. In the silence of his home, as the reality of his situation began to settle in, Michael's phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. This time the message was blunt and final. "I'm done waiting, Michael. You either leave her now, or I'll make sure everything comes to light. Don't test me." As the words stared back at him on the screen, Michael felt the weight of his world shatter. He could no longer run from the truth. The choice had been made for him. His marriage, his career, his entire life as he knew it. Everything was crumbling in front of him. The affair had been the catalyst, but it was the lies, the betrayal, and the moral compromises that had truly led him to this moment. For the first time, Michael understood the full depth of his actions, and he realized there would be no turning back.